welcome back. And in this lesson, we'll be looking at block scope in JavaScript. Remember that in the previous two lessons, we've talked about the global scope, we've talked about the function scope, how functions can be accessed globally, and how how variables can be accessed globally, which is the global scope, and how variables work when declared inside functions, just as we were able to see in the last lesson where we try to have a variable declared inside a function and we access that same variable inside the function, and then we now try to access that same variable outside of that function. The part where we try to access it inside the function gave us a correct output, while the other part where we try to access it from outside gave us an undefined as the output, which is telling us that that variable that we are trying to access is function scope and cannot be accessed from outside of that function. And so that leads us to another scope in JavaScript, which is the block scope. Before ESC's ECMAScript 6, JavaScript variable could only have global scope or function scope. So what gave rise to block scope in particular is as a result of the two new keywords that were introduced in ECMAScript 6 for declaring variable. Before ECMAScript 6, the only way to declare variable in JavaScript was using the var keyword. But in ECMAScript 6, they introduced two important JavaScript keywords, the let and const. So this gave birth to the block scope, which means that if you use let and const within a block, then it becomes inaccessible to an outside maybe method or anything that you're trying to use to access it as well. And that is the concept of what we are going to talk about in this lesson. These two keywords provide block scope in JavaScript. So let and const keyword provide block scope in JavaScript. Variable declared with let and const inside the code block are block scope, meaning they are only accessible within that block. And what that means is this. So let me just pull up my editor. So if you are talking about scope, what exactly is a scope? So if I wipe this and I have something like this, and I say let x equals to 4. So this is a scope in JavaScript. So this is a block scope in JavaScript, and I can as well have it as a const if I don't want it as a let. So this is a scope, the opening and this closing of this curly brace, and what I have inside this is a valid code block scope in JavaScript. So ES6 gave rise to the block scope as a result of the introduction of the let const keyword, and this help prevent unintended variable variety and promotes better code organization. So this block scope, what it helps does is that it helps us to prevent unintended variable variety so that you don't declare maybe an existing variable or something or a value that you don't want to change. So this block scope is what it helps us to prevent that, and then it promotes better code organization, knowing that there are values that will stay constant as you work on your program or your project. So that's the concept of block scope in JavaScript. Now, if you assign a value to a variable that has not been declared, it will become a global variable. Now, the code example that I'm going to show us is going to show is going to show us how a variable can become automatically global. So, and how a variable can become automatically global is when you assign a value to that variable, even though it has not been declared. So this is simply just doing something like if I say something like maybe I do x is equal to 2. And you can see right here that there's a name, but there's nothing that is indicating whether this is the variable yet. So if I give it a value and later I now declare it and say, okay, let's x equals to 3 before I now make use of it in my code. So this way, if I declare it this way, x equals to 3, it becomes automatically global, even though I have not declared it, but by assigning value to it, it becomes automatically global. And another thing I want to talk about is the strict mode in JavaScript. So strict mode is something that you can enable in JavaScript, a special mode that makes the language structure safer. So it helps you catch bugs early and prevent some confusing and error-prone behavior. So let me just show you that. So what I have here now, if I want to use street mode in order to catch a bug earlier, I'll just put use street this way. And then if you look at this and I do something like document dot write x, is this showing anything? Okay, it's not showing. Let me just inspect to see what could be the problem. If at all I'm going to get an error, you can see this reference error x is not defined because of this strict mode. But if I take this strict mode out, let me see whether it will work. And then you can see that I am getting 3 as the output of x. Meanwhile, this is declaring variable this way is not recommended because it has made this variable globally available automatically just by giving it value before I now declare it. But with strict mode will tell me that this is something that I have not declared. Just as the reference error read that this variable has not been declared. Okay, x is not defined. Yeah, x is not defined. Though it has a value, but it's not defined. So that is how strict mode help us to catch bug earlier and make our code safer in JavaScript. So it is supported in modern browsers and it makes us understand that in strict mode, undeclared variable and automatically global. So it helps us to catch bugs like that very, very quickly. Global variables in HTML. With JavaScript, the global scope is the JavaScript environment. In HTML, the global scope is the window object. Global variable defined with the var keyword belongs to window object, which means that when you define variable with var keyword, it belongs to window object. Window object is that your entire web tab, that your entire tab that you're using in the browser is the window object in JavaScript. So you can use some built-in Windows method or properties that comes built-in with your browser with your variable in that environment. That's what the the window object means. Global variable defined with let keyword do not belong to the window object. So you can see the difference between declaring your variable with var keyword and let keyword. Now, there are now some warning that you should take note of as a developer. Do not create global variable unless you intend to. So probably maybe you are doing something for demonstration purpose, just as I demonstrated now. That is when you should create global variable in order to avoid inconsistency or overwriting of an existing variable that you've declared. The global variable or function can overwrite Windows variable or functions. You can see the disadvantage. Any function, including the window object, can overwrite your global variables and functions. So when you have a global variable, the Windows object can overwrite it. For any function, including the window object as well, can overwrite your global variable and function. And this along the way can now begin to let you have an inconsistent, display of what it is that you are trying to achieve initially. So this is how uh, this is how block scope works in JavaScript. So this I'm just going to show us how a script, how a variable can become automatically global. It's this simple example. So let me just use the example I used the other time. So I'm just going to call this function first, and then I'm going to try to access it. Get element by ID 21 dot inner HTML equals I own. So I own because I want to concatenate can. Now you can see that I am referencing a variable here that I've not even declared. Now, if I now come down and make that function by function, can post to, yeah, okay. Let me just try and see what I am getting as the output. Now you can see I own BMW, which means that I've already been calling this variable even before I declare it. And by doing it this way, by giving it, by, by assigning it, by assigning it, even before I declare it, it makes it become automatically global. And later, when I now define it inside my function, because I have, assigned it by calling it here, it makes it become automatically global. Do not forget when we talked about how a variable can become automatic global, and this is a simple example of how this can happen in your code. So this is the variable name here, but it has not been given value, and later I gave it value. But by declaring that variable name here, it has already become global, which is what gave me access to be able to which is what gave me the access to be able to access the value, even though I have it inside function, which is not supposed to be so, because we have learned that functional scopes are limited to within the function. But you can see that I'm accessing it outside as a result of the fact that I've been calling that variable name even before I declare it and give it value here. So in the next lesson, we'll continue to look at more other aspects of scope in JavaScript. Thank you, and I'll